My guest tonight was the most influential hip-hop artist in Australia in the early 90s, a man who paved the way for the success being achieved by Australian hip-hop artists of today. I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that life has involved some extraordinary highs and lows, and we'll hear about those. But out of the studio and away from the stage, Cameron C-Rock Calliope has encountered some amazing people, both good and bad, while making his life in a white man's world. He's endured racism, bullying, sexual abuse, severe depression, and there have been times when he's chosen to walk away from it all while, quite literally, looking success square in the face. A success that once more beckons in 2013. Cameron, welcome to Turning Points.
G'day, mate.
We're going to cover lots of ground about your most extraordinary life over the last 30-odd years. First, tell me about growing up in the Gulf. You were born in Normanton.
Yeah, I mean, it's a place that time doesn't exist, you know. It's still stuck in this specific time frame of the outside world doesn't exist, you know. When I want to go home back to the Gulf, I go home for those reasons, you know. I can, I grew up on cattle stations, in cattle stations, out bush, spent very little time as possible in town. Because we didn't get TV till 1988.
Yep.
And so that allowed, kids to be kids and bush kids to be bush kids, So as much time as I could spend at bush was the best place to be. Out fishing, hunting, any time I could get my friends to lie to my grandmother so I can go out bush for a week, that was a done thing. But it's a special place, those remote areas of Australia that a lot of Australians don't get to see, a place where time doesn't really exist, very ancient place. Traditionally, culture's still there, people still indulge in those type of things. Even though when I was there, you didn't realise it, that you had your culture there,
because it's around you. It's just the way it is, isn't it?
So it's like asking a kid in the city, what's your culture and stuff. Their culture is McDonald's and those type of things. That's just, how it is in the city. So when I came to the city, people asked me, do you, know your culture and stuff? And I said, no. Because it wasn't my culture, it was me. It was
home.
Yeah. So, the idea of calling it my culture just was ridiculous. Because it was like getting up on a Friday afternoon and going and catching a movie at the local Birch Carroll and Coyle, It was normal like that.
You look back on those times with good memories? Because I'm guessing there's highs and lows. I mean, there's highs and lows for everybody, aren't there?
Yeah. I mean, you can't look back on anything on top of, if you're going to learn anything through life, you can't look back on anything and see it as something negative,
Sure.
Because then you're not learning a lesson of what was going on in that time period. So, I loved it when I was younger back home because there was the innocence of not being influenced by TV, not being influenced by MTV, Jersey Shore. It was none of that. It was you were able to, and the good thing about growing up there was you had these big blue open skies, and you could think as much as you kind of wanted to and find yourself, which I find. I think a lot of city kids miss these days. They don't get to be outside and just having that open sky just to be able to expand their minds. That was a good time back home. Certain aspects allowed me to become who I became later and who I am now.
Sure. You were raised in part by your grandmother, and I know your uncle Jerry was a big influence in your life. Very important to have a close-knit family support group in those remote communities.
My mother had me when she was 16. I can actually remember my mother sneaking me off to a party and at Bush, and I was under one because none of my brothers were around. And I remember a car light coming in. It was my grandfather looking for me in the old Ford Utes. And my grandmother, my grandparents, they slaved away. My grandfather ended up supporting all the grandkids, worked an honourable job on the local council, He was a hard man, came from a different life, back in a time when it wasn't so safe to have darker skin, and I held, a lot of negative feeling towards my grandfather for so long because he was so physical and violent with us, us boys and stuff. But as I got older, I realised that he was just a product of his time too, you know.
Yeah.
So I found myself feeling compassion for him rather than anger towards him, you know, especially coming through the teenage years. But my grandmother was, you know, the heartbeat of everything. You know, she kept us together, and in Aboriginal culture, it's the women that have kept the culture alive.
Yep.
You know, you go a lot of places and the hierarchies are women, you know. They're the ones who get women's groups together, make sure things are this cultural things, you know. And it doesn't matter how big a man is, culturally, he'll always be second best to whoever he's married to, you know. My great-grandmother was married to the king, you know.
Yep.
And she was a strong woman,
Yep.
which explains my grandmother, you know. Strong woman, a Christian woman, but compassionate and caring. And so having all that aspects of violence too through my childhood, it made it bearable that I had somebody like my grandmother there, you know. Nothing would be possible today without her, you know. And then my uncle Jerry went away to school, went to St. Peter's here in Brisbane, and he introduced me to what could possibly be out there, you know.
I mean, how do you remember him coming back home and telling you about what he was experiencing at school? Because it must have seemed like something completely otherworldly.
It was magic. It was magic because that was out here. It was this make-believe world,
Yeah.
you know, of fantasy and
That selected people get to go and visit, but everybody else stays here.
yeah, you know, and it was, you know, if I be honest, it's my uncle went away and became this person that a lot of my family put him on this pedestal, and he became this person that was unachievable. You know what I mean? Through a child's eyes.
Yeah.
Not his opinion, but other people in my family would literally say to me, "You'll never be as." He used to bring back certain clothes from a city, and we would only get our clothes from a local church.
Yep.
You know, second-hand clothes and things. And he would bring clothes back from the city that he would give to me, and if I wore them, certain members of my family would say, you know, you need to take that off. You know, who are you trying to be? You're trying to be Jerry. You know, you'll never be as good as him. You know, as a kid, you don't say that to kids, you know what I mean?
It's amazing. People have high aspirations for people, and when they start achieving those aspirations, then they become resentful of other people trying to have the same goals for themselves.
It's an interesting thing, and I think that people that will watch this, it might make them consider that, that we place people on pedestals and we call them role models. And the word role model, for me, has always had this negative kind of meaning, because it tells me that this person has been placed somewhere that can't be achievable by you because you're average. You're just, you know. So my uncle used to go and come back and bring back clothes and stuff, and when he came back, it was magic. You know, absolutely magic. He would talk stories, you know, tell us stories about boarding school and what he was doing and here, or when he went to university, and he did the things that we all dreamt we could do, you know. And he introduced me to Bob Marley and Whitney Houston when she first brought her first albums out, and you know, and I heard this music, and you know, and it just caught me in that place that, you know, that really, you know, magic place when a kid is totally in awe of somebody, and that somebody offers them something in free will. You know, he offered me music, you know, and it was at a time in my life where I was a sponge and I needed that attention and I needed that nurturing, you know, and he became that person for me.
And amazing how much influence something like that music to come into, to hear that for the first time, to hear Bob Marley for the first time for free. Here, put these on and listen to this, it will change your life, and it literally will. Within seconds, within minutes. It's an amazing experience, isn't it?
Yeah. It's, I mean, and what Bob Marley talked about too, it made me think there's something else going on here, you know.
Yeah.
I was really aware as a kid about things. I think because Mum was so young when she had me that I had to associate with her friends, and I thought in my mind they were my peers too.
Yeah, you become part of that group, don't you?
Yeah.
Despite the fact that you're a toddler, a baby.
Yeah. So by the time I had Bob Marley and, you know, music, you know, being played at home, I was really, was becoming really aware of the greater of everything, you know, what was going on out there, and
Yep.
maybe what I was being told about life and my place in it maybe wasn't as true as it was being made out to be, you know. So he played that role. If it wasn't for Uncle Jerry, it wouldn't be, you know. I still call him since I was a kid, Uncle Jumbo, you know, because he was always big when we were little, you know.
Oh, he was tall.
Yeah, and I still call him that. You know, if it wasn't for him and my grandmother, that partnership of one of being a nurturer and a protector, and sharing that love, then my uncle coming from the other side and triggering things, you know, thought things and showing me that attention and telling me, you know, you should, you know, read the story in the paper. He would pass me newspapers and say, you need to start thinking about things, you know. And never pushed it on me, allowed myself to actually, you know, move into those roles in my own life rather than telling me I need to do this, I need to do that.
Yep.
He just presented, you know, the things to me and I chose to take them or not, you know.
Tell me about that time when your grandmother and your Uncle Jerry got together and sent you on the same path that he followed and sent you to boarding school here in Brisbane. Do you remember that day leaving home and the reactions from those people that told you that that wasn't available to you, that you couldn't be that person?
In my mind, I was killing time until I was able to leave and go and start my real life.
How did you see your real life at that stage? What did you have your eyes on a career as a musician, as an artist, as a creative person?
As a kid, I just remember just saying, I'm going to be somebody.
Yeah.
You telling me that I'm not going to be anybody. I'll show you, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that's where my drive and my ambition started from.
But even back then, you were showing some extraordinary athletic talents, for example, as a runner, as a footballer.
Yeah. I remember getting beaten. My last race I ever lost at school was grade 3. And after that, I was the king. But my uncle was a great athlete, you know.
Yep.
You know, so he would bring back track and field gear, you know, running spikes and stuff, and I would put them on a run through the bush with them.
Yeah.
Anything that I could find that I could excel at that actually gave me an individual pedestal rather than being in a classroom and doing it that way, that didn't really allow you to have that individual attention. Whereas if I was a sprinter and I won the race, I was number one. You know, so I use sport as maybe a way of starting off to prove other people wrong. You know, that no, I'm not going to be that. You know, I'm not going to be what you say I'm going to be or you want me to be because you're beaten down, you know. I'm going to break the cycle. And it was always in my mind, you know, growing up around a very physically violent household, you know, seeing my mum getting beaten all the time, you know. I used to remember laying in my room crying, you know, as a kid and thinking, you know, this is, you know, I'm going to go a long way. I'm going to be somebody. I'm going to break the cycle. This will never play its role in my life, you know. And I used athletics as a way out too, you know. I knew that if I was talented enough to get out of there, then I would, it might be the leg up that I need. People can go, hey man, you're a real fast runner.
Well, we've talked
I'm
about
in the door.
Yeah, but before we even started talking about doing this, we've spoken about your ability to recognise the fact that the talents that you had gave you the ability to parlay and get stuff for yourself, to get yourself into schools or to find opportunities purely because people sought that talent that you'd have. Yeah,
now you kind of talk about it, I was clued on from the start. I knew what I needed to do.
Yeah.
You know, my grandmother came to me in December 1989 and said to me, I know you don't like it here, and I know you want to leave, but you need to know if you don't pass grade 10, that St. Peter's won't accept you because you need C passes.
Yep.
And I was Fs or Ds, Zs, you know. And that's when I made a decision that I knew that what I had to do. You know, so if I'm getting Fs and stuff, so I got, you know, Cs, Bs, and As, you know, and got me out, you know, and that was the start of an extra quadruple journey, you know. Yeah.
You look back on the early times growing up in Normanton define you to this day? Are you still that person that grew up then?
That kid that was there and told that he couldn't be anything is always inside of me. Always.
You're always fighting back against that, aren't you? Are you fighting back against or rebelling against it, or because as a hip hop artist, rebellion is part of what makes a hip hop artist.
I think that's what will always, if you don't learn by your past and you don't learn by your mistakes, you always say this was a really bad time, then you're not learning by it. So
Yeah.
I look back at those time periods, and because I've made peace with them, that allows that person, that kid back then, to have a protected place inside of me, but he's still vulnerable, he's still, and I nurture, that little kid, and I make sure that he never dies inside of me, that he reminds me where I've come from, what I've had to do against, odds that a lot of people don't get to see,
When we come back, we'll talk to Cameron about founding Native Rhyme Syndicate and the highs and lows that followed after the last, 16, 18 years? You're watching Turning Points.